So Korg wasn't the first company to make a small portable musical device, but it's arguable that when it launched the Volca series in 2013, it kickstarted something of a gold rush. Soon, every company under the sun, from big names like Roland to smaller players like Modal Electronics, were getting in on it, but a case could be made that 1010 Music has managed to cram the most synth power into the smallest possible package. The company has launched a new line of devices it's calling Nanoboxes, starting with the Fireball, a wavetable synth, and the Lemondrop, a granular synthesizer. Now, at $399, these things are a little bit pricey. That's more than twice the price of your average Volca, but spending about 10 minutes with these things, it becomes clear that their competition isn't really the Volcas of the world, and they might not have many direct competitors at all. These are more or less the same device with a different color and a slightly different firmware. On the hardware front, they both have 2-inch touchscreens, 2 endless encoders, and 4 buttons down at the bottom that bear more than a passing resemblance to the old school nav buttons on Android. Around back, you've got 1/8-inch jacks for clock in, MIDI in and out, which can also be MIDI through, audio in and out, a micro SD card slot, and USB-C. Now, unfortunately, the USB-C is for power only. That means you can't do MIDI over USB, and you can't access the SD card storage from USB. If you want to load your own custom samples and wavetables, you have to take the card out, put it in your computer, copy the files over, and then put it back in the synth. Their most obvious physical feature, though, is their size. At 3.75 by 3 by 1.5 inches, they're almost impossibly small. They can fit in any bag and a large coat pocket. I've been throwing it in my winter jacket for a while now. And if the size makes you a little skeptical, that's more than fair. I was a bit skeptical at first too. How could I make music on something so small? It turns out the answer is rather straightforward. Despite the tiny size of the screen, the Fireball and Lemondrop are more than usable. Do I wish the screen was a little bit bigger? Sure, but it's big enough to show you most of the relevant information you need at a glance, and it actually provides a lot of visual feedback as well. You can see the envelopes and the LFOs moving, and you can actually see the wave shapes change and see the grains in your sound file moving back and forth. Now, these 2 knobs are assignable macros. That means you can use them to control a number of parameters simultaneously. Now, you could also just assign one to the filter cutoff and call it a day. That's up to you. But more interesting is this also has an XY pad mode, so you can actually use the touchscreen to control those macros, almost like you would with one of Korg's Chaos pads. It's an ingenious move and probably the most fun way to interact with the Lemondrop and the Fireball. Now, paired with an external MIDI controller, the XY pad turns this into a surprisingly hands-on synth, but if you want to skip the external MIDI controller altogether, you can. There is a note grid on here, and you can quantize it to scale so you don't hit the wrong note. It's not the easiest or best way to interact with it, I don't think, but it's still usable. It's most useful, I think, for playing drones on the Lemondrop, I find, using the hold function, and then switching over to the XY pad to create sort of evolving soundscapes. They both also have a pair of primary sound sources in the course of the Fireball, 2 wavetable oscillators, and on the Lemondrop, a pair of granulators, and a third simple oscillator. This can be either saw, triangle, sine, square, or noise, and there is pulse width modulation on the square wave. It's really good for thickening up a sound a bit, maybe using it as a sub-oscillator. And they both have a pair of multi-mode filters that can be run in series or parallel. Now, these are morphable from low or high pass with resonance to band pass and notch. And then both also have 2 effect slots, one of which is primarily for modulation. You can use flanger, phaser, chorus, or distortion there, and another one which is dedicated exclusively to time-based effects, reverb, or delay. Now, all of these similarities mean that every pro for the Lemondrop also applies to the Fireball, with one notable exception, which I'll get to later, and every con for the Fireball also applies to the Lemondrop. For example, the effects are a welcome addition and they're solid, but they're probably not going to win any awards. That being said, the reverb is really good. Cranked up to full wet, you can get a really interesting sort of artificial ambience, and when paired with the distortion, you just get these gorgeous digital howls that are clearly made for scoring the surrealist ending of an art house horror film. And the 2 LFOs and 2 envelopes and the modulation sequencer are really great for shaping your sound, but not every parameter can be a modulation destination, and not every destination can be used with every source. So if you wanted to use LFO1 to control the rate of the phaser, tough. Now on the pro side, you can use up to 3 modulation sources with most destinations, so you can create some real unpredictability there, and the modulation sequencer is really great for creating complex patterns. Not only that, but it can be quantized and used to control the pitch of the oscillators. So that means you have a kind of rudimentary note sequencer or arpeggiator at your disposal. And you can use this to control the oscillators individually, so you can even play a little lead arp over a sort of bassy pad. Still, I can't help but wish that there was a centralized interface for viewing and controlling your modulation sources and destinations. As is, if you want to see everything that LFO1 is controlling, you have to go to each parameter individually, go into the modulation menu for it, and kind of just keep track. I will say that in general, though, 1010 Music does an admirable job of keeping menu diving to a minimum considering the limited controls. You will still have to do some while designing a patch, but it never feels too cumbersome. The biggest shared con, though, is the lack of battery power. Now, yes, USB battery banks are nearly ubiquitous at this point, but still, it would have been nice to have the option to slap a couple of AA's in there and just run out the door. Between MIDI, audio, and power, that's a lot of cables coming out of the back of something so small that's ostensibly portable. Where the 2 differ primarily is in sound engine. The Fireball is a pretty bread and butter wavetable synthesizer. It has 103 wavetables with 123 presets covering everything from growly 90s bass to crystalline pads, but you can also load up your own wavetables. Fireball has 8-note polyphony, which should be more than enough for most people, and has a unison mode, which is really good for getting like super thick monophonic bass going. With the right settings and the right wavetables, you can get something vaguely analog sounding out of it. But it really shines at like crisp, clean digital sounds. Which honestly isn't such a bad thing, since apparently the 90s are back in style. I probably should have kept a hold of my Doc Martens and Jenkos. The Lemondrop, on the other hand, is a granular synthesizer. That means that it takes a sound file, in this case up to 30 seconds long, chops it up into little bits, and then spits it back out. That sound file can be anything you want, from a piano, a drum loop, or a field recording of birds. Now, the Lemondrop only has 4-note polyphony, but frankly, that should be fine. With 16 grains per oscillator, things get pretty complicated pretty quick, and frankly, I don't think anybody needs to play 8 notes of jungle ambience simultaneously. Obviously, what each patch sounds like will depend a lot on the source material, but Granular still has a very specific characteristic. And unsurprisingly, the Lemondrop is exceptionally good at sort of otherworldly soundscapes, atonal drones, and really oddball pads. And while there are plenty of those amongst the 311 wave files and 153 presets that come included, it is capable of more traditional synth sounds too. Now, granular synthesis isn't new, but dedicated granular hardware synthesizers are hard to come by, especially under $500. You're more likely to see granular synthesis in Eurorack modules or in computer software. There is the Bastel Microgranny, but its take on granular synthesis is far more limited, and it's more of a lo-fi sampler than an actual synthesizer. That being said, it is a great lo-fi sampler. Now, you can use the built-in effects on both the Fireball and the Lemondrop with external audio, and you can even use the XY pad to manipulate those effects in real time. But the Lemondrop has another neat trick. It can use live incoming audio as the sound source for its granulators. That means you can add granular effects to any audio as it's coming in, be that your voice, a guitar, or another synthesizer. And this opens up another really neat trick as an extension of that. You can just plug in a monophonic synth, play a note on it, just hold it, and then play it through the Lemondrop, and you magically have a 4-note polyphonic synth. Now, both the Lemondrop and the Fireball are undeniably fascinating instruments. They're impressive feats of engineering. And if space is your main concern, whether that's because your synth dungeon is the size of an airplane bathroom or because you're trying to build a setup that will fit in a briefcase, I can see the obvious appeal here. There are some trade-offs, though. The lack of hands-on controls may deter some, and while yes, you can map them to a MIDI controller, that kind of negates some of the portability factor. And again, the lack of battery power seems like a real missed opportunity. The idea of being able to throw one of these in my bag, along with my PO33 sampler and a couple of batteries, makes just such a killer on-the-go setup. And then lastly, there's price. Now, $399 is not absurd considering the power here, but at that price point, they're facing a lot of stiff competition. Modal Electronics Sculpt and Craft are just impressive digital behemoths that are dirt cheap. And if portability isn't a concern, there's always Arturia's Micro Freak, which is only $350 and is arguably more powerful and more flexible than the Fireball. But what none of those synths can offer is granular synthesis. One of the few dedicated granular synthesizers out there I could find, the GR1, is a much higher end piece of equipment that costs 849 euros. At that point, you could also just go out and get an organelle, and there are granular patches available for that. But for under 500 bucks, something that's portable, the Lemondrop really stands out. It's in a class of its own. While the Lemondrop and Fireball are undeniably very good synths, it's the Lemondrop that stands head and shoulders above its sibling. Thanks for watching, and for more of the latest tech news, reviews, and the occasional synth demo, stay tuned to Engadget.